So here we are again, just thinking that there was so much left unsaid, and so we've recruited Mark, and Janie and I get a chance to say more, and we're giving ourselves 10 minutes. But the rule is that at 10 minutes, we get the hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So same questions as the first time, really.
Yeah.
And so those questions are, what do we identify as being born or becoming, and what do we identify as dying or coming to an end?
Yes.
In Shambhala. And then the second question is, what do we see as the roots or the causes of the current crisis? Is that, did I remember the questions right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's worth commenting that the first questions were so rich that when it came to the end, we kind of degenerated into to-do mode, which is kind of what, our form of governance kind of slides us towards that. It's hard to really take time and say, we're really going to spend time on big picture, longer term. So, yeah.
I would agree. This is hard work. Number one, being willing to kind of look at the big picture stuff, but number two, really being able to relate to each other around our own personal views. We don't, at least as a leadership body, we don't have a lot of comfort with that. We're a lot more capable of working on the nitty-gritty details and throwing these questions out. There was a little bit of hesitation, but I experienced it as being a really rich discussion.
And how does that fit into root causes? The fact that we kind of have this, we get into a role and somehow don't speak so much from the heart, but speak from, well, this is my job to say X, Y, Z. That's a question.
Could you say more about this is my job to say X, Y, Z?
Well, I think that Mark is pointing to something that's really significant about how leadership has been operating, is that, we kind of think, well, since I'm in this role, then I should speak from that role, not from whoever it was I was when I came here.
I think we're also in a really difficult place right now because we're essentially in a sort of a type of spiritual crisis, and as the governing council, we have a wide variety, a diversity of views on where we should be headed. And then, in addition to that, this is a spiritual community and really a spiritual crisis. And none of us are identify as, or would even necessarily be identified as, a spiritual authority. And so then how do we as a community make decisions around something that we don't really have authority to make decisions on? Like, we want to talk about the big picture, and it's absolutely vital that we do. But actually navigating how we work with the big picture, and how do we move from, well, just connecting and relating, which is the first step in sharing our subjective views and feelings about it, to making important decisions for a community, a governing council. I guess that's maybe for the next conversation.
I would agree with that. I think that if we were to sit down with these questions 2 years ago, we'd be speaking from the context of knowing what Shambhala is or was for us, and also what our role or our part or our connection was to it. I think both of those can't be taken for granted anymore, for any of us, really. At some level, all of us, both locally and internationally, are questioning, what's happening? Who am I now? Where are we going? Where am I going? What choices do I have about where we go? So that just creates a lot of stress and anxiety, and also opportunities to do things in a new way. John, unmute yourself.
I'm kind of aware of the background sounds.
Oh, yeah, that's me.
I mean, I think that's a kind of root cause of where we are now, in some ways. That, you know, we've felt like, you know, we shouldn't be taking responsibility in the way that we're trying to now, and so in that sense, it's tremendously rich time, full of so much potential, but it's also a little bit, well, it's very unfamiliar.
Yeah, I think one of us at the council used the expression of being in the bardo, which I think is literally true in a lot of ways. What we were is functionally gone, you know, and I know you mentioned in the last, your last discussion, just the need to really grieve, and each of us kind of doing that in our own way. And what we're going to be is not yet evident. There's no sort of clear path to where we're going or what we need to do in order to get there.
And Mark, I agree and disagree with what you just said, in that as we spoke about a little in the last video, and at the council meeting, we don't yet know what to grieve, what is done and over with, and what is going to carry through, what is, you know, maybe wilting and needs to be nurtured and watered, or what is actually dying. So yeah, even in terms of our identity, I think in our community, many of us still feel very certain about what Shambhala is, and many people feel uncertain. I think one of the questions that we left most unanswered was, what are the causes that contributed to this? What has led up to this? And we've named a few. Last time we talked about just this process of bringing Vajrayana Buddhism to the West, and that process isn't over. And so there's still kind of a transformation process that needs to happen. And we're experiencing a hiccup right now, bringing in tradition that's founded on the guru-student relationship, and maybe a greater amount of trust and faith and devotion than is standard in our culture. And then also the structure of Tibetan Buddhism, which is hierarchical and really spiritual meritocracy, and then we're bringing that into a democratic culture where I would say, especially in the progressive circles that I tend to live in, there's a growing movement of working with non-hierarchical structures and consensus decision-making, et cetera, which I think many of us have worked with a lot and want to. And there's at least in my culture, there's a sort of faith or real belief that there's something really important there, that part of that is the future of like awakened conscious culture, which is very kind of, I don't know if it's an opposition, but it's very different from what Shambhala is bringing from Tibetan Buddhist culture.
So one connection there is how Shambhala has kind of been isolated from the larger social environment. And we talked about how there were ways that that was really important, you know, to make Shambhala this kind of pressure cooker that could contain something and grow something. And that, you know, that also has a lot of risks and downtime. Down.
Oh dear, I'm sorry I talked so much.
Mark, since Janie and I talked before, maybe you could say a little bit more, because we haven't heard from you enough.
Right.
But to hell with the schedule, you know?
I think just very briefly on the causes and conditions, I think you guys really spoke well to the situation of Shambhala in society. I think the only thing I'd add is that part of that transition is it's generational in nature. There's a whole group of folks that really had deep experiences with Trungpa Rinpoche and also with the Sakyan. And their way of being in the world and in Shambhala is very much rooted in those experiences. And then there are the folks who came along later and whose experiences are very different. They may be more local. They may be more specific in terms of the type of activity or the type of service that they're able to provide, but not necessarily with the depth of those who came first. So we're dealing with that tension as well in understanding who we are now as a community. And,
but can we allow ourselves to think that the current experience is somehow lesser than what happened before?
Lesser, you mean in the sense that what came before was the actual Shambhala?
Yeah, the real deal, and that now is some kind of, second rate kind of thing.
Well, what do you do when, those charismatic leaders are no longer in the throne? I realize that the Sakyong has stepped back, but, he's not giving us any direction currently. So what do we do, when we don't have kind of that person to sort of open the sacred universe for us? Somehow we've got to figure out how to do that ourselves, at least for the time being. So there's a lot of need to look to each other and talk and to kind of sort it out. And I think to kind of winnow our experiences in a way, to kind of figure out who we are at this point.
That is
but you haven't
awesome.
answered my question about whether to do what we need to do, can we afford to act like this is a second-class experience of the path?
I think that's completely against any basic Buddhist teaching. This is the present moment. We can't idealize the past.
Bingo.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But that might be setting up a straw man, though. I don't know. In terms of, I think there may be a lot of value to looking at the past and how our community was first created, and those teachings at the Vajradhara. I mean, our mission as Shambhala is to hold and nurture and perpetuate those teachings.
Absolutely.
So inherent in that is a sort of idealization of the past, and it's one that I am actually committed to at some level, even though we still need to be awake to what is going on now and be flexible and open to whatever transformations are needed for our community to continue on.
I think that there's a lot of brain research and theory that says that our memories are always constructing the past. And, we have to acknowledge that we're constructing the past with the benefit of the past and with the benefit of current understanding, and that we can't go back, that we have to actually kind of, stand up and and deal with this situation. And that, fundamentally, that is what Shambhala is about.
Yeah, that's
You know,
true.
I mean, Trungpa Rinpoche did not sit around and moan about the loss of what was there in Tibet, which on some level was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
In terms of spiritual accomplishment, you know,
Yeah.
he kind of got busy and worked, and I think that, you know, that's pretty important for us to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow, that just, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna kind of dovetail, John. Ego does indeed like a good story, and it likes to be able to tell itself those stories over and over and to sort of reinforce itself. So, like you say, the experience of losing kind of our formative narratives in a time when, you know, we're uncertain of what those narratives are is a great opportunity for practice. To do exactly what it is that we've been taught to do.
Yeah.
And the analogy with Tibet and what the Vijayadhara, how the Vijayadhara came from Tibet, he lost everything, and he still chose to open himself to and really assimilate to Western culture and this kind of new and strange culture, and try to translate his teachings into that culture. And I think if we apply that to now, and even locally, it's like we're here in Portland, Oregon, and there's a lot of social transformation happening locally. And so how do we bring that in? How do we transform with the social transformation that's happening all around us?
So maybe on that note, we should end the video. And thank you, everyone who stayed for this long. And we'll see you next time.
Very good.
Okay. Bye.